Trigger warning. This podcast is about grief. Whether you are newly bereaved or whether you have been stuck in grief for years, I do hope this podcast brings you some comfort. Grief is such a universal experience, but we all do it differently. This podcast is not about fixing you or forcing the healing process because there is no cure for grief. It can only be experienced, absorbed, loved and cared for. So whether you are doing it privately behind closed doors or like me, you are kicking and screaming your way through, let's support each other. My name is Louise Bates, and my hope is that this podcast shines a light on your path and gives you the strength to navigate your way through the grieving process. I'm sending you so much love and support, and I look forward to sharing this journey with you. Welcome to this episode of A Gift for Grief. This is the space where we share stories of loss and love in the hope that we can lighten or loosen your grief in some way. Today, I'm joined by Sue Williams, whose story is both inspiring and deeply human. After taking early retirement from the civil service, Sue faced the heartbreaking loss of both her parents within just a year. In the midst of grief and uncertainty, she turned towards creativity and spirituality, exploring journaling, art therapy, writing and self-discovery. Sue began journaling, which then led to poetry. This blossomed into her award-winning book, I Am Unique. Since then, she has gone on to create oracle cards, publish anthologies that uplift women's voices, and inspire others to believe in their ability to live fully, especially in midlife and beyond. Sue's journey is a powerful reminder that even in the depth of loss, creativity and courage can help us rediscover who we are and what we're here to share with the world. So, welcome, Sue.
Thank you.
It's lovely to have you here. Now, I can't remember how we first met. Was it when you came to record your book?
Yes, it was when I came to record my poetry book for Audible with Heathcote Studios. And, of course, more recently recorded a podcast as well for Golden Threads.
It's funny how things pan out, isn't it?
It is.
But before we talk about your book, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Yes, certainly. I call myself an author and a poet. And, as you said in that lovely introduction, poetry's figured quite large in my life since I left work, since I took early retirement. And it's something that came about because I was exploring my latent creativity, if you like. And I did something which a lot of people will be familiar with, The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron, which is journaling, free-flowing journaling in the morning is one of the aspects of that, which is something that did have a powerful effect on me and did lead me to writing the poetry that became that book, I Am Unique. And also, I think as by nature, I'm quite a sort of collaborative connector. You know, if you do your personality tests, I'm a connector. And as I was going out into the world networking, I was coming across what I saw as lots of inspirational women. And I kind of went on this journey of helping them to share their stories in collaborative books. So I've done 4 collections of collaborative books now. 3 of them are on the topic of self-belief, the Believe You Can series. And the most recent one is called Golden Threads, Women's Shared Wisdom from the Tapestry of Life, which is how we largely came to connect.
Yes. Mm-hmm. And now it's a podcast as well, which you started releasing.
That's right, yes.
So you retired early from the civil service, and then both your parents died within a year. Now, that's a lot of grief. Could you share a little bit about that time in your life, but only as much as you feel comfortable with?
My dad actually died in 2009, which was before I took early retirement. And that was quite different, if you like, to the way my mum went. He'd had a few problems. My dad was one not to go to see the doctor. He kind of resisted it.
Yeah.
at all costs. Eventually, he was kind of made to go. He'd got a lot of swelling around his stomach area, and the doctors just put him on kind of water retention tablets or something like that, and didn't really diagnose anything major. He was a very sort of quiet man. He didn't really let you know how he was feeling or what was going on. And looking back, there are certain things you can remember that you think, oh gosh, I wish I'd done something different in those circumstances, because we were on holiday at one point in Wales, and all of a sudden he sort of stopped as we were walking around some grounds and was a bit overcome, and his lips went a bit blue. And basically I sort of sat down with him on a bench, and after several minutes, really, he kind of rallied, he recovered, and everything seemed okay. But in retrospect, there was obviously a lot more going on at that point in time. And obviously when he did go to the doctors, they didn't pick up on what was going on either. And literally when he did pass, it all happened really quickly, because I'd actually gone away for a weekend to Belgium. When I came back, my family, my mum and brothers was like, we didn't know whether to contact you, because my dad had gone into hospital, and my mum, she'd woken up next to him in the night and he was coughing up blood and all this.
Oh, no.
So she was like, that's it. I'm calling an ambulance. He still didn't really want her to call an ambulance. And obviously that's then, he ended up in hospital. And they thought he wasn't going to last over that weekend. That's why they were calling for me. I think it was good. It was very helpful to me that he was still alive and in hospital, because obviously if I'd not been able to go and see him, and that had all happened without me being aware, I think that would have been much worse in many ways. And he did actually, he lasted out the week, and when I was in hospital with him at one point, he kind of tried to whisper something, and I kind of leaned down next to him, and he said, I never thought that I would go downhill so fast.
Oh, bless him.
And that was it. It was the way he just thought, carry on.
Yeah.
Carry on, and everything will be okay. He kind of was in denial in many ways.
And I think that's quite common in the older generation, isn't it? They come from that stoic, keep calm, carry on generation.
Definitely.
So, yeah. Oh, but you had that time with him, and that's a blessing in itself, isn't it? Because you had time to say goodbye and anything that you needed to say.
Yes, and in a way it's interesting, because it was strangely fitting. Because my dad was the way he was such a quiet, if you like, a quiet man, often in a way in the background. And as I say, you didn't often know what was going on under the surface, what he was thinking. The fact that it did happen so quickly, it was almost like in a gentle way. It also seemed quite fitting. I'm not going to cause you any trouble, almost like that. That was kind of how it felt. So although it was a shock in many ways, it didn't kind of have that effect in terms of bringing out really sort of strong, if you like, grieving and emotion at the time. I think I take after my dad in many ways, and kind of, stuffing down emotion and not expressing emotion in many ways. But it did feel comforting at the time.
Yeah.
And interestingly, I think two things as well kind of helped me. One was planning his funeral.
That can be a good distraction, can't it? In a way.
Not just a distraction. I think it's actually, for me, it's kind of like thinking about your relationship and what's significant and what's important.
Yeah.
And so actually thinking through, what did Dad love, and having, I suppose, even little things like having some music that I thought was fitting, like the 633 squad, the theme from the 633 Squadron and things like that. I found that comforting, and I felt that the funeral is like a kind of honouring. The service is kind of like an honouring of their life they've lived. So I think it's quite a privilege to perhaps be in that position to be able to do that.
It's nice that you look upon it like that. Yes, yeah. How did your mum cope afterwards?
I mean, in a way, the sad thing was that my mum did become very ill herself straight afterwards. I think as well, it was a shock to her in the sense that she always thought she would be the first to go, because she'd actually had quite a lot of serious illness in her life, whereas my dad hadn't.
Yeah.
You know, many years before, when I was in my 30s, my mum had non-Hodgkin's lymphoma.
Yeah.
And that had quite, I think, the treatment and dealing with that had quite a profound impact on her, and probably on the rest of us as well. And so, again, if you think of the difference in some ways between my dad and my mum, because my mum had been through all that, it's kind of like I had a history of worry, if you like. Whereas with my dad, we were I suppose this is it in a way, you're kind of in a bit of a bubble. You're kind of like, he just goes on, you know.
Yes.
It wasn't just losing my dad. It was the fact that, you know, we became aware that she was ill again.
Yeah.
And so that started kind of like about a year, just over a year until her death, really.
So did the grief feel different to you, to the grief that you experienced with your father?
My relationship with my mother was much more complex than with my father. And I've been reflecting on this. I mean, it's coming up 15 years since my mum died. And it's almost like there was a grief journey, almost like that, or a healing journey that came after my mum died. And I think because we had this more complex relationship, it also meant that I then started this journey of who am I and what do I want. My mum was quite a strong personality and could be quite definite in her views and controlling and so on in many ways. So both my parents had difficulty in expressing their emotions in different ways. So with my dad, it was like keeping it quiet and in the background. With my mum, I think she would be more verbal about it, if you like.
Yeah. So the spirituality and self-discovery, is this something that started after the death of your parents?
Yes, and I think it was the part of the catalyst was, you know, both losing my two parents, and also leaving my job. So it was I think that was a catalyst for it, and it was kind of like it opened things up in such a way as to say, well, who am I and what do I want? So I did start, I suppose, this journey of discovery, really.
Yeah.
In the run up to my mum dying, we spent a lot more time together, obviously. And I remember we had this one conversation where she spoke about, now, when she was a young girl, she'd had a brother who died before she was born. And I knew about him. So I thought it was, you know, fairly kind of open, common knowledge. But when I was having these conversations with her before she died, she was saying, oh, you know, Peter wasn't talked about. And I was like, well, he was, Mum, because I know about him. It's not like he's a secret or anything like that. And she told me this story of, and I don't know how old she would have been, but she would have been obviously quite young. And she'd been playing in one of the bedrooms in my granddad's house. And she'd gone into the wardrobe. And they must have shut away Peter's things in the wardrobe. And so unbeknownst to her, you know, it was off bounds, really.
Yeah.
And my granddad had come in and found her rifling amongst these things. And he'd shouted at her. You know, he'd really shouted at her and it really frightened her.
Yeah.
And she said she made a vow. And I thought this was quite fascinating. She made a vow to marry somebody who was totally different to my granddad.
How interesting.
That's what she said.
Yes.
And as part of this journey I was going on, you know, after I lost both my parents, I did think that was quite fascinating. And how in many ways, I mean, my dad was completely opposite to that, my granddad on my mum's side. And I kind of thought, is it, wow, you know, is it some sort of self-fulfilling prophecy? Was this all meant to be? And I think I did have occasions when I went to see psychics, Not specifically, I think, to get messages or anything like that, but I did on occasion get messages through visiting psychics. I mean, and one of them, I remember this would have been about, I don't know, a year or so after my mum had passed, where the psychic told me my granddad was there and that he was giving me a red rose and that he was apologising for the impact that he'd had, not just kind of on my mum, but also on my life as well.
Yes.
And that he'd not realised what the impact would be. And I do think there is something about, and that generation, of course, you know, again, suppressing their feelings. I think what my mum was saying, you know, they hadn't been able to perhaps speak about Peter.
Yeah.
And she must have picked up on the kind of underlying emotions, the underlying grief, and maybe felt less than to a degree. Because I do think as well, there's this whole thing about Peter being a boy, if you like. He was the firstborn. He was a boy. My granddad was very much kind of like a man's man, if you like.
Yeah.
And I could imagine him having as well that great sense of loss around the things they would have done and didn't end up doing, playing sport or whatever, that kind of thing. So that sort of element of the spiritual side of things did start to come through, and I think and went on for quite a long time actually, because even where are we now? Probably about 2 years ago, I had an experience with Peter myself.
Okay.
So that was, if you want, I don't know.
I'd love, you've got to tell us now, Sue. You've started.
So I'd gone up to Findhorn, and it was a spiritual retreat.
Oh, this is in Scotland, isn't it? Yes, yeah.
Yeah. And curiously, one of the things you've sort of wanting to explore in the interview is things like signs.
Yeah.
And I do see signs from time to time. And there was a minibus connected to Findhorn that was parked outside, and the minibuses had names. And this one, in large capital letters, said Peter. So I'd kind of seen that and thought, that's, it seemed quite curious, almost like it was some sort of sign. And one day we were doing, and I can't remember exactly what the exercise was. We were doing an exercise, and Peter came through really, really strongly. The essence of Peter came through really, really strongly. And I got really, really emotional and really, really upset. And I was kind of saying, we've got to help Peter. We've got to help Peter. You know, we've got to, I can't exactly remember what was coming up, but it was about something around, supporting and healing him. Yeah. And I was feeling quite desolate. And actually it was to the extent that it kind of disrupted the session, and people actually left the room, and somebody had to come and sit with me kind of one-to-one. And some of it, I think, is connected to that sort of what I was talking about, how kind of through the lineage the grief had been passed down, and to some extent I think Peter was himself upset about it. Yeah. Because I'd had a connection with him previously on another occasion, again unexpectedly, where he'd come through, and I just had this sense of his energy of being very joyous, a very happy little boy. Yeah. And I got this sense of him saying, be happy, enjoy life. I want you to enjoy life.
And this was previous to the one you had in Findhorn?
And this was a different occasion. So it was kind of, I'd had two very different experiences of him. One is of this very sort of innocent, joyful boy who wanted me to be happy and enjoy life. And this other one where I felt quite desolate. And I guess that's maybe around the loss of the life he'd not lived and the impact it had had, I think, on my grandparents and my mum and so on, because unwittingly by dying he'd caused them pain.
Okay. So do you feel these experiences have helped you to heal any ancestral healing that needed to be made? Have you made peace with this?
It's been quite a journey, I think, and some of it has come up through the poetry. I think the poetry has helped in some ways to go deeper and to explore or release some of that.
I'd love you to share some poetry, Sue. Have you got anything in mind that you'd like to read out?
Yes, that'd be lovely. I'd like to read one called Shine For Me.
Okay, sounds good.
Shine for me. As you remember me this day, let sweetness blend with sorrow. You are my gift left on this earth to create a brighter tomorrow. And as you ever blossom and grow, my legacy lives on. So be my light within this world, through you still brightly shone.
I love that. That's amazing. So how many books have you done altogether?
I've done 4 collaborative books. So they're collections, obviously, of stories by different women, and combined my poetry in 3 of them in the Believe ones. And then the 4th one is Golden Threads, Women's Shared Wisdom from the Tapestry of Life.
And people can get these from Amazon, yes?
Yep, they're available on Amazon and or via my website. And there's also, as I say, the poetry book, which is called I Am Unique. So that poem I just read out is from there as well.
Yeah. Okay. So with your grief, was there any one thing that helped you, or was it a combination of different things?
I think it was definitely a combination of different things. And it's been quite, as I say, looking back, it's been quite a journey, really. Because when my parents died, and I think in particular my mother, it was like a new journey began. And the grief, I think, a lot of it was around things that perhaps in our relationship we didn't have. So coming to terms perhaps with how the relationship itself was, and also grieving in some ways for the relationship we didn't have.
Yeah.
So there were lots of different sort of stages in that journey. Now, if I say at one point, a psychic said to me, it's like your neurology is so tangled up with your mother's, you don't know where you end and she begins.
Okay.
That was a very powerful thing to be told at one point. So it might sound like quite a simple thing, but when I wrote my chapter in the Believe book in 2015, so that's 5 years after my mum's death, I was reflecting on this walk that I went on with a friend through the woods. And I made a simple comment. I said, oh, my mum would have loved those flowers. And after I'd said it, I was like, whenever I look at flowers, I always say that. My mum would have loved those flowers. It's never about me.
Ah.
And I think that really kind of illustrates what I was told about our neurology being mixed up.
Yes.
And so as part of this journey, this ongoing journey, I've reached a stage in recent years where when I do look at flowers, for example, I do now appreciate them for myself.
Yeah.
But we can't underestimate sometimes the impact, that certain things have had on us, I think, because it did take me a long time to actually begin to see things through my own eyes rather than through, I suppose, how I perceive my mother's eyes to have looked at them.
So do you believe that grief has changed you in any way?
Yes, I think, first of all, there's that realisation that it is a process, and it can take place over many years.
Yeah.
It's it's not always a simple, or try this healing or this therapy or this kind of writing class or anything like that. I think sometimes it's those incremental steps where you kind of almost like take a step back, become a bit more of an observer and think what's really going on, what was really going on here, and what's the impact it's had on me. There was something about, I suppose, putting myself almost centre stage as well, and going through that process of coming to terms with not only that sense of, because I had a sense of loss, I think, right from a young age. I think I came to realise as a sensitive child, I'd picked up on a lot of what my mum was experiencing. Things like the fact that she had to leave work, things like the fact that I think she felt she had to become a mother. That's what was expected of her in many ways. Things like carrying pain, I think, through my grandparents' loss and all that. I think a lot of that I was picking up on that under the surface because I was kind of quite an intuitive young child. And so I came to realise through part of this journey with grief, really, that I needed to be conscious of that in a way that my feelings could get tangled up with those of somebody else. And it's kind of separating out, what was my grief and what was my mum's grief at certain things she'd lost in her life.
So you're carrying your parents' grief, your grandparents' grief from a very early age, and then you've got your own grief on top. That's a lot of grief, isn't it?
It is. And I think through writing the poetry, it was kind of like I also expressed in some poems, I think, the weight of perhaps centuries of grief, around, I think, women not having had a voice in many ways, not being able to express themselves. And that as part of my journey is, gosh, how much we can take on wittingly or unwittingly and carry with us, really. So finding ways, I think, of kind of unearthing what really is going on under the surface, and writing was probably one of the powerful ways of doing that, really.
So do you feel that, finding your spirituality and becoming creative and a writer is your way of healing all this ancestral grief that has built up over time?
I definitely think it's part of it. And I think, the poem that I read out earlier, Shine for Me. I think one of the realizations I had was that whatever the relationship we've had, say with, particularly with a parent, as in my case, they have really birthed us as a gift. We are still left here on this earth as a gift, and we have that ability to both live our lives in a way that's positive and joyful, and that is very different from what people had to live in many ways in the past. So we've got that freedom, we've got that choice to explore joy and all that kind of thing for ourselves.
Then my next question is, because I think we're sort of going down that way, do you believe that grief has the potential to bring unexpected blessings or positive insights into your life?
Yes, so I think these things that I'm kind of talking about in a way is, I would never have thought that there was something that I was meant to do around healing the lineage. It would never have occurred to me. And these things, started coming out, as I say, through things like the poetry and all that. And I also got this feeling at times that I needed to go to different places. It was like there's been a definite sort of connection with Scotland. I think it's no coincidence that when I had that experience around Peter at Findhorn, it was in Scotland. I discovered the family name. The family name isn't Williams. My family name is Magott. And at one point, again, on a journey to Scotland, I'd never, when you go and you you used to go to fairs and things, and they'd have these books, and you'd be able to look at your family name
Yeah.
and see where it came from and what it meant. For years, it was like if that was the opportunity, I'd open them and my name wouldn't be there. And yet, on a trip to Scotland one year, there it was. The first time I'd come across it in this shop around kind of heraldry and ancestry and all that. And it said that the name was connected to Scotland, and in particular the clans and fighting around the border area in Scotland. And yeah, I had unknowingly written a poem, for example, about that whole kind of thing.
That's interesting, isn't it?
So it was coming up in me. It was coming out through my writing. I mean, when I started writing the poetry, I was writing about knights in battle, swords flashing, metal crashing, and all this kind of stuff. And I was actually writing and thinking, where is this coming from?
Yes.
So yeah, definitely. I feel that was a very unexpected part of kind of grieving and healing. It's not just my parents or even my grandparents' generation. It goes back much further down the line.
Yeah, yeah. So where would you say you are in your grief journey now?
I think there are certain things I've realised around this whole thing of honouring our parents. You know, I think we all go through tough times.
Yeah.
Generally speaking, as with my parents, you know, they do the best they can with what they're given, and in the time that they lived as well, you know, because there's been massive change, really, hasn't there, in the recent decades.
Yes.
The amount of change there's been since our parents' time. You know, I think my parents were young just after the Second World War. When you think of that and kind of the austerity and all the things that they'd experienced. And so I think a big part is kind of honouring my parents' journey, you know, appreciating more what they've been through and why it led perhaps to some of the experiences that I had in my relationship with them.
Yeah.
And if my mum, for example, didn't know how to deal, think of the weight of all that she carried. And then when you add in the fact that there is this ancestral element going back for centuries, particularly with, you know, the role of women and how, you know, how they haven't featured so much and they've not had a voice, then it makes you stop and think, wow.
Yeah.
You know, so one of the big things for me is kind of honouring that journey, and also going back to what I was saying about the poem Shine for Me. You know, we are carrying forward, not just, I think, for ourselves and the world, but for them.
Absolutely. Yeah.
We can make an impact, we can make a change, and just however big or small that is, you know, like doing the collaborative books for me is an opportunity to help women have a voice, you know, to help women share their stories. Like this podcast is an opportunity for us to express these things that don't always get expressed or talked about.
Yeah.
You know,
and it gives us meaning and purpose as well, doesn't it?
Yes, definitely.
Yeah. Now, we all go through various life events. Some are positive, good experiences, and some not so good. And losing our loved ones is the most difficult. But if you could have a conversation with your younger self after your various life experiences, what advice would you give to yourself?
I would say it's this whole thing about being sensitive. I think it's about saying to my younger self that I, you know, was picking up on other people's energy, that I need to sort of be aware of that and set boundaries in a way.
Yeah.
That it wasn't up to me to solve or to... In fact, I didn't have the ability really to change things in the way for my parents. I took on, you know, don't take on other people's sadness or negative energy or anger, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
is find a way to almost like to protect yourself and put those boundaries in place.
Yes, good advice. So what would you like people to learn from your experience?
I think we all grieve in different ways. And I think it's one of those things where, firstly, you know, you're helping with this through having this podcast in a way, because it's kind of like, do we really understand what grief is? You know, and it's like, if you look at it, I might have thought, oh, grief is this kind of outpouring, you know, crying and being upset for days on end or something like that. And of course, that can be what it is. But it's like it was only reflecting on all this that, you know, it came to me that actually this journey as well of healing is a big part of it as well,
Yes.
of kind of exploring the impact that, you know, people's lives have had on you. And it can also be that opportunity to have a new beginning.
Yeah. It's an ongoing process as well, isn't it?
Definitely.
There's sort of no end, and I don't think we should have any goals. We need to get to this point. It's just take each day as it comes, honour your feelings, allow yourself to feel what you feel.
Yeah.
So yes. Now I know that you believe in signs, so interested to know what your thoughts are about the afterlife.
You know, I think because I've experienced signs and I've experienced certain things that you can't necessarily explain in a rational way.
And you've been to psychics, so you obviously believe that you can communicate and there's something there.
Yes. You know, and that came about. It's funny, the first time I went to a psychic was because a friend had lost her father. And I just went along to support her and, you know, as you do, keep her company and console her and all that sort of thing. And because we actually travelled a reasonable distance, it was like, well, I might as well see the psychic as well.
Yeah.
And
As you do.
as you do. and so I haven't got any expectations at all, really, when I went in. And that psychic actually described my paternal grandparents. And I you know, in a way that it was quite simple, but I recognised them.
Yeah.
Because, you know, like, my granddad was quite tall and thin, and my nana was quite short and stocky, and this is how the psychic described them. And she just said something which I can't exactly remember now, but I know it was just something very day to day that, like, my grandmother would have said. And they were lovely, kind, you know, people, gentle people. And it was just so reassuring and so unexpected, because I was thinking about my friend, you know, and I'd kind of almost like forgotten that maybe my grandparents could come through, that sort of thing. So that was one of my first early, very positive experiences of visiting a psychic. And then if you're looking at other situations, I had an experience around the writing and the Hay House. So back in 2017, I went on a Hay House writers retreat in Bristol.
The Hay House are the publishers, aren't they, for the mind, body and spirit sort of sector?
Yes, definitely. Big sort of mind, body, spirit publisher. And they had this weekend event to help you with writing and if you wanted to publish a book. And as a result of going on this Hay House workshop, there was an opportunity to submit a book proposal. The Hay House writing competition had obviously a deadline and a time when they would announce the winner. Something I wouldn't have expected. I was actually on a cruise in Norway on the day that they announced the winner. And it had been a friend who'd suggested this, and it was something she wouldn't normally have said. She would normally have wanted to go to a hot country or something like this. And we'd gone to Norway on this cruise. And my mum, we loved the film The Song of Norway at the time. And my mum would have loved to go to Norway, but never did. And she didn't really get to travel very much at all. And my friend had said, let's go to this house where Edvard Grieg lived. And again, my mum loved Strauss and all those kind of Grieg and all that sort of stuff. And the ship was delayed a little bit coming into port. And my friend said, I don't think we're going to have time to go to the house. And oh my God, when she said that, I got really upset and I started sobbing.
Oh.
And I was like, we've got to go. We've got to go. We've got to go for my mum.
Yeah, yeah.
And it felt like, looking back on it, it felt like those two, the Hay House had provided those markers.
Yeah.
It was like around the lives that both my parents hadn't lived in some way.
Yeah, yeah. Well, did you get to the house?
Yes.
Oh, thank God for that.
Yes.
Oh, it's funny though, isn't it, how these things can hit us without warning, just come from nowhere.
And that was sort of, I would say, it's 7 or 8 years after my mum had died, you know.
Yeah. So, Sue, if you could give your parents, or your grandparents, or even your ancestors, talking about ancestral healing, if you could give them a message now, what would you like to say?
I think, you know, there's one thing that kind of came out in one of my poems that always kind of struck me. As I say, because these things often just come through you. And it was about something along the lines of, it's not about us or them, it's about men and women living alongside each other. And we've both got our own strengths.
Yeah.
So I think it's something along that whole thing of, you know, respecting what we all have to offer, and rather than continuing that sort of thing where we've suppressed a particular gender or that kind of thing,
Yeah.
to see the positives, I suppose, in each other, and to live harmoniously and cooperate in many ways. And so the two lines in the poem I See You are, rise as women alongside men. It's not a case of us against them.
I love that, Sue. And just before we finish, can we end on one of your poems as well?
Yes, definitely. I'd like to read one called Reclaiming Me, which I suppose summarises a lot of the journey that I've been talking about that I've been through.
Yeah, perfect.
Reclaiming me. This is me. It's who I am. Sick and tired of feeling a sham. I claim my courage, face my fear, break through constriction of society, self-imposed limits, those initiated by you, mummy dear. It's taken so long for me to find out, conquer interminable worry, dread and doubt, gain a sense of my genuine feelings, not bound by expectations, sending me reeling. I've carried a heavy burden, incredibly long, a yearning to impress, fit in, belong. Yet how can I truly be accepted when my sense of self is not at all strong? I've taken time out to search and explore, investigate habitual refrain of poor, unloved little me. Playing the victim kept me safe, conditioned by restrained reality. Now I recognise the power of my own thought, subconscious nature I was never taught. Express myself authentically, not how I ought. Honesty, truth, legitimacy. Sometimes struggle, often fly free. One thing I know for sure, the more I continue to embrace my feelings, create a life I adore, continuously claiming the inner me, I truly experience how magical living a multifaceted life can be.
So, Sue, that was beautiful. Thank you. I love how you are able to process your thoughts and feelings through your words using poetry. What I found really interesting during this podcast was that when I asked you questions about your grief, where are you on your journey and so forth, you spoke a lot about your parents and your grandparents, but very little about your own experience. But here you are expressing it in your poetry, which just goes to show how healing poetry can be, not just for the writer, but also for the listener or for the person reading poetry. Because when you read poetry, it goes in differently. So if you're reading a poem about grief, your mind processes it much deeper, and it can be more healing sometimes than having a conversation with somebody. Poetry is so healing. So I recommend people check out Sue's books and her poems. And thank you for today. It's been really enlightening, Sue. Thank you so much for sharing your poetry, for sharing your journey, from the heartbreak of your grief to the courage of stepping into creativity, spirituality, and a whole new chapter of life. Your story is a beautiful reminder that even in the darkest seasons of grief, there can be sparks of light through writing, art, community, and the willingness to explore new possibilities. Healing doesn't erase loss, but it can guide us back to ourselves in surprising and meaningful ways. To all of you listening, may this conversation encourage you to find your own creative or spiritual outlet, however small, as a way to honour your grief and nurture your growth. Remember, you are not alone, and your voice, your story, and your healing matter. If today's episode touched something in you, I hope you'll share it with someone who might need that same comfort. I'm Louise Bates, your host, and I'll be here next time as we continue to gently walk through the pain, the resilience, and the unexpected gifts that grief can leave behind. Thank you, Sue. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of A Gift for Grief. If you found it comforting, please consider subscribing to my podcast so you don't miss any future episodes. Please also leave a review because it helps others to find the show. Together we can help each other become more grief literate. To learn more about my personal journey and my 2 books on grief, visit www.louisebates.co.uk. The music on this podcast was written and recorded by my son Matthew Bates and can be found on his 2 albums, Fight Back and Kaleidoscope. And finally, if you're struggling with grief or concerned about your mental health, please reach out to your doctor. You don't have to go through this alone. Until next time, be gentle with yourself and thank you for listening.